On the 1st of May, 1599, Severin was chosen as the new capital of Romania, as Bucharest was now part of Wallachia, which had meanwhile repelled the Papal State with the help of their ally, England. Under their queen Leofa Hasting I, she was quite enjoying her revenge. The world in 1600 was one of intense and unforgiving changes. Namely, the turn of the 17th century is widely regarded as the official start of regular global trade. Wars were far more ruthless now, deadlier than ever before. They cost more in not only human life and suffering, but also in terms of what the state itself could lose in a peace treaty. Meanwhile, with the other great nations of Europe filling their coffers with the lavish riches of global trade, Romania's fall from grace was shocking in its speed and startling in its totality. Truly a nation awash in ruin, the people would subject themselves to a meager existence while the outside world prospered without them. For some Romanians, however, the die was cast for enmity between them and the rest of the world, a sentiment that would soon spread and endure for centuries. Beginning in 1601, Romanian rebels surrounding Constantinople began to give Wallachia a great deal of trouble, proving themselves rather difficult to govern. In May of 1604, the alliance between Germany and Romania was ended by Kaiser Arnulf II. Meanwhile, in September of 1606, Anglo-esque fisheries in the New World flooded the European markets with an unimaginable supply of fresh fish, and in November, Bourgogne experienced a kind of coffee boom, with its trade connections allowing it unfettered access to the drink. This boom would spread across Europe until cafes became commonplace on the continent over the next decade. Also, the Romanian revanchist rebels in Wallachia began to fulfill their demands and occupy more territory. Plovdiv was the first to return in such a manner. In the north of Wallachia, there were rebels wreaking havoc as well. Protestant zealots had risen up in their hundreds of thousands, tired of coexistence, to make the first truly Protestant state. Catholic zealots responded to this in the south, beginning to occupy most of Greece. True religious strife had come to Wallachia in the form of civil war. A few years after their resplendent victory, their religious tapestry was now bursting apart at the seams. The great powers as they stood in 1610 were as follows: the Bahmanis at the bottom, Transoxiana, Japan, Rajputana, Germany, Armeniakan, England, and the Papal State at the top, secure in both Europe and their colonial ambitions in South Africa. Wallachia, desperate with over 200,000 rebels in total, entered into a personal union with England after the death of their queen at the hands of Protestant rebels. During this time of general malaise, the energetic Cossacks began to grow their influence, thriving in an environment of ineffectual state power. It is generally accepted that the February of that year marked the beginning of the age of absolutism. Protestantism had made its mark, and now the rulers of large states began to consolidate power to make their own marks on history. Taking after earlier Romanian diktats of state sovereignty over the people and never-ending monarchical expansion of power, they went ahead with their designs. In 1611, Tarnovo defected back to Romania as the revanchist armies found continued success, having defeated the Protestant rebels at the Battle of Bekesh. Later that year, Silistria came back into the fold. In 1612, Burgas defected back to Romania. At this rate, it would seem that Romania was on the track to regaining almost all of its lost territory, and perhaps a good deal of its dignity as a result. Meanwhile, because of the long history of church independence and state non-involvement, the Orthodox Patriarchate began to donate a portion of its vast riches to the crown, in order to show gratitude and thanks for their support in their own times of difficulty. Romania was now at a fine pace of economic stability, earning just over 5 ducats a month. Respectable and manageable, it was still nowhere close to the income they should have been earning given their size and trade connections. On the 23rd of November, 1612, a Bengali trading fleet became the first ever to circumnavigate the globe. In 1613, Wallachia mobilized 12,000 men to try and beat back the 62,000 Romanian revanchists, and their allies sent them 16,000 Anglo-esque men who began to reconquer occupied territory, like Bucharest and Edirne. Regardless, the Romanian revanchists defeated those proud overlords at the Battle of Sofia, tramping their flags underfoot. On the 15th of November, 1614, Kral Radu Ilyas Basarab I established a national bank to handle financial affairs, which he was admittedly quite poor at. In 1615, a quarter of Germany's territory was lost to lesser kingdoms like the Palatinate in the west, and under a new Kaiser Landolt Blagaj, Germany officially converted fully to Protestantism. Král Miloš Basarab I ascended to the throne on the 26th of February 1621. Good at many things, he wasn't explicitly good at any particular thing, and as such the people were unsure of what to expect of his rule. In June of 1623, Král Miloš began to tenuously rebuild the army. With the Romanian rebels in a game of cat and mouse with the Wallachian military, and therefore making little progress, Král Miloš thought that he could do more than just sit back and watch. Indeed, he had the intention of getting involved in a true war, a true reconquest of rightful Romanian land. In 1625, Princess Adelina was born, and Békés defected to Romania. In 1626, Edirne defected to Romania, and all of the territory lost during the Great Embarrassment at the turn of the century had been returned to them, thanks to the work of determined homegrown rebels. As such, Král Miloš abandoned his designs of invasion, but does not abandon his military development. In 1627, Norlanti began to break into its component kingdoms, namely Norway, Sweden, Gotland, and Savo. In 1635, Král Miloš passed the Fenariot taxes and the Acts of Dissolution, each of which were systems of increasing trade revenues across the kingdom, one through bureaucratic reform and the other through devolution of certain economic powers away from the Král. It was these reforms that put Romania back on the map, so to speak, and the kingdom rejoined the great powers as the lowest among them. In 1636, Mazovia sold its province of Krakow to Romania for 400 ducats. In 1638, the realms of Romaniakan and the Golden Horde continued in their rocketing decline, each at that time an archipelago of exclaves held together by a thread from a final chunk of territory where they still held authority. For the last of the Mongols, that place was Kola, in the far north, beyond Finland. For Armeniakan, they ruled from Erzurum in a matter that was only slightly more stable than that of the Golden Horde. Later that year, the Holy Land would fall into the hands of the Mamluks, making it the first time in almost 800 years that non-Christians held Jerusalem. By 1640, meanwhile, it could be said that things were back to normal in Romania. They were economically stable, on good terms with most of their neighbors, and thanks to Král Miloš they had a respectable standing army with which to defend their newfound normality. This normality was not to last long, however. On the 18th of July, 1650, Král Miloš Basarab was assassinated by English agents who lit his carriage aflame with burning arrows, and Králika Adelina Basarab ascended to the throne at the age of 25. Upon her ascension, an English-backed pretender by the name of Mihena Tepelus contested her claim to the throne with 16,000 rebels, while 20,000 English soldiers invaded from the northwest through Trenčín, with conquest as their stated goal. Wallachian ships also blockaded the friendly ports of the Aegean Sea. This marked the beginning of the Pretender War. This was a calculated invasion, schemed and coordinated in order to ensure Romania never saw a full recovery. Králika Adelina mustered 30,000 men to fight and took as many forts as possible off of storage. She brought Romania back to a bare deficit each year, making the hairs in the back of her advisors' necks stand up. The first battle was lost at Severin to the Tepelus pretenders, and a retreat was ordered south to Constantinople. Next, the army, rested, launched an attack against a second contingent of 16,000 Anglisk that had made landfall at Silistria. The landing invaders were defeated and their ships driven out of port back into the Black Sea. In April, the rebels were defeated at the Second Battle of Severin, and the 24,000 surviving men marched north to meet the spearheading force at Trenčín. Once there, 13,000 men from Romania's ally and fellow Orthodox faithful Tver came streaming over the border and began to occupy ahead of Romanian troops into the enemy exclave of Anglisk Austria proper. On the 6th of March, 1653, while embroiled in battle with the Anglisk, Mihena Tepelus led a rear attack of his rebels, killing the unsuspecting Adelina in the military camp and assuming the throne for himself, thus ending the Basarabian dynasty and beginning the Tepelus dynasty. When the Englisk general, Ealdmund Harold, approached the new traitor king to negotiate the terms of their agreed-upon ceasefire, things took a turn. The night passed, and his men did not hear back from him. The morning came, and sounds of celebration were all that could be heard from the Tepalus tent. On the third day, he was seen riding back on his horse, only to slump off its side in a bloody mass as soon as it arrived, revealed dead for at least 3 days. Wearing the general's hat, Menea Tepalus I charged the Anglisk camp and decimated it, continuing the war. The final battle occurred at Linz, where the Romanian forces, numbering in total at 33,000, fought the well-equipped Anglisk reinforcements. After a week of fighting, the Battle of Linz would be lost due to the superior equipment of the Anglisk, but a white peace was signed nonetheless on the 15th of April, 1654. Meanwhile, Germany's decline continued further and was partitioned along its north and south by Bavaria, a growing power in the region. By 1655, things had stabilized, and Romania was still considered a great power, but just barely. It would come to be the hallmark of the Tepalus dynasty to lay low in the eyes of the world, with Romania improving itself quietly and with minimal foreign interactions. Thus began the informal period of izolare, meaning isolation.